Welcome to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we've got an incredible story lined up and I can't wait to share it with you. As you dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us know your location. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on tomorrow's special story. Trust me, you'll want to be the first to know what's coming next. Let's get started. How one royal guard took on a giant corporation and won. The full story. Captain Jack Thompson moved through the bustling terminal of New York's JFK Airport with the quiet confidence that came from years of military service. At 45 years old, Jack had spent over 20 years in the U.S. Army, earning numerous commendations along the way. His presence, though understated, exuded the discipline and precision that defined him. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his military bearing unmistakable even without his uniform. His mission today was simple: travel to Chicago to deliver sensitive documents to a key military division. The diplomatic pouch containing these documents was secured in his carry-on bag, along with a neatly packed case holding his ceremonial uniform, a symbol of honor and tradition. As Jack approached the first-class check-in counter, he was greeted by Lisa Monroe, a flight attendant with a warm smile. She noticed his military ID, and her demeanor immediately softened. "Royal Guard," she said with a nod. "My brother served in the Marines. He always spoke highly of you guys." Jack returned her smile and responded, "The Marines are exceptional. Soldiers, please give him my regards." A moment of camaraderie passed between them, but little did Jack know this interaction would soon take a turn. As he boarded the flight, Jack settled into his first-class seat, placing his carry-on above, and securing the diplomatic pouch next to him. The seat next to him was taken by a distinguished man in his early 50s, Nathan Wells, who was busy reviewing a portfolio. Everything seemed ordinary until Karen Jones, another flight attendant, approached. "Welcome aboard," Karen said, with a mechanical smile. She handed Jack a hot towel, but her eyes scanned his uniform and military ID, and for a moment, her smile faltered. "What brings you to Chicago today?" she asked, her tone oddly sharp. "Official business," Jack replied simply. "What kind of work do you do?" she pressed, her gaze lingering on him, clearly unimpressed. "I serve in Her Majesty's Royal Guard," Jack answered, his voice calm and composed. Karen's attitude shifted in an instant, a condescending look overtaking her expression. "Oh, one of those soldiers who stands outside the palace," she remarked, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "How quaint. I suppose the military must be flying its toy soldiers first class these days." The word stung, but Jack remained unfazed. His years of service had taught him how to ignore the jabs and maintain composure in the face of disrespect. Yet Karen's behavior only escalated. As the flight prepared for takeoff, Jack stood to adjust his uniform case in the overhead bin, noticing it had shifted. Karen appeared instantly, her voice sharp. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, her tone dripping with irritation. "My uniform case needs repositioning to avoid damage," Jack explained politely. "That large case is yours?" Karen sneered, her eyes narrowing. "It's taking up most of the bin. Perhaps if you checked it like a considerate passenger, others would have more space." Jack's eyes narrowed as well. "Military protocol prohibits checking ceremonial uniforms," he replied, his voice even but firm. Karen scoffed, her voice growing louder. "Of course, the military always expects special treatment." Jack stood firm, refusing to engage further. As Karen continued to berate him, he simply repositioned his uniform case and returned to his seat, his composure never faltering. But Karen wasn't done. She continued to press him, loudly questioning why he was flying first class. "Military personnel are always gaming the system for upgrades," she said. "Must be nice to have your vacation subsidized by the public." "Please, I need to see your ticket again," she demanded. Jack retrieved his boarding pass and handed it to her. She examined it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This doesn't specify the reason for your first-class allocation," she said triumphantly. Standard protocol requires proper documentation for premium seating. My travel arrangements were approved through military channels, Jack replied, his patience thinning. The nature of my assignment necessitated these accommodations. Karen, still unconvinced, demanded that Jack move to economy class. Without proper documentation, for your first-class allocation, we can't verify your eligibility, she declared coldly. You'll need to relocate to row 27. The humiliation was palpable. Jack stood up, keeping his dignity intact despite the blatant disrespect. As he moved past the rows of curious passengers, each step felt like an announcement of his demotion. Karen made no attempt to minimize his embarrassment, and the ordeal continued as Jack was forced into a cramped middle seat at the back of the plane. As Jack sat down, Nathan Wells, the man seated beside him, shook his head in disbelief. "This is completely unacceptable," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "I'll be filing a complaint." Jack simply nodded, keeping his composure. "Some battles aren't worth fighting," he replied, his calm voice unwavering. Despite the public humiliation, Jack understood the bigger picture. His silence, while painful, wasn't just about personal dignity. It was a stand for something greater, the respect owed to every service member who served their country with honor. Little did he know, this incident would soon ignite a legal firestorm that would challenge not only the airline's practices, but also society's respect for those who serve. As Jack sat in the cramped middle seat of row 27, his mind was a storm of thoughts. He couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated. He had always prided himself on maintaining composure, even in the most difficult situations. But this was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about something far greater, the respect that every service member deserved. Around him, the plane's cabin buzzed with the hum of passengers, many of whom had witnessed the whole exchange. Some stared in disbelief, others whispered amongst themselves, but no one dared speak up. Jack had always known that his uniform carried weight. He understood the legacy and the responsibility it represented. But today, that weight felt heavier than ever. His dignity had been tested, and for a moment he had wondered if he should have fought back, demanded justice right there and then. But he remained silent. He knew better than to engage in a public spectacle. Karen, the flight attendant, who had made his life hell for the past hour, was now standing at the front of the cabin, chatting with her fellow crew members. Her laughter, sharp and mocking, echoed in the back of the plane, further fueling Jack's growing frustration. How could someone with so little regard for the sacrifices made by others be allowed to hold such a position? His mind raced, and, for the first time in a long while, Jack felt the deep stirrings of anger. It was at that moment that Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had shown him some kindness earlier, leaned across the aisle. Her eyes locked with his, a sympathetic understanding passing between them. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, her voice low enough so only Jack could hear. "What they did to you, it's wrong. You deserve more than this." Jack managed a slight nod, grateful for her support, but the frustration still simmered beneath the surface. He had been humiliated, treated like a second-class citizen by someone who should have been showing respect for the uniform he wore. "It's not just about me," Jack replied quietly, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "It's about the uniform. The men and women who wear it deserve better." Sarah's gaze softened, and for a moment she seemed to be weighing her options. "You're right," she said, her voice resolute. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about something much bigger than that. There are others out there, service members who have been treated the same way, who never spoke up because they didn't think it would make a difference." Jack met her eyes, sensing the sincerity in her words. "You've seen it before, haven't you?" he asked, his voice tinged with the realization that he wasn't alone in this fight. Sarah leaned back in her seat and nodded. "I've been a discrimination lawyer for 8 years. I specialize in military cases, and I've seen it time and time again. Airlines, restaurants, hotels, corporations that claim to support our troops. But when it comes down to it, they treat them like second-class citizens. They refuse to honor military discounts, deny benefits, or worse, humiliate them in public. Jack's heart sank. It was hard to believe, but the more he listened, the more it seemed like this was a pattern. "What can I do about it?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and helplessness. "Well," Sarah said, leaning forward, "you have options. You don't have to let this slide. There are legal avenues you can take. You can file a formal complaint. We can build a case. I've been working with other service members who have experienced the same kind of treatment. We're gathering evidence, and I think it's time this airline face the consequences of their actions." Jack felt a flicker of hope, though it was tempered by the exhaustion of the day's events. "I'm not sure I want to make it a bigger deal," he admitted. "This wasn't just about me, it's about respect for the uniform for all of us. I just don't want to make a scene." Sarah smiled gently. "I understand. But sometimes standing up for what's right means making a scene. It's not about causing drama. It's about making sure people know that this kind of treatment isn't acceptable. And if you don't speak up, nothing will change." Jack took a deep breath, his mind now turning over her words. He had always believed in quiet dignity, but Sarah was right. Sometimes silence was not enough. Sometimes you had to stand up, not just for yourself, but for the countless others who had been wronged in the same way. As the plane descended toward Chicago, Jack made up his mind. He would report the incident, and he would do so with the full knowledge that it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever worn the uniform and had been treated like they didn't matter. Jack knew that he was about to take a stand, one that could change the way the world saw military personnel forever. And as the plane touched down, he reached for his phone and made the call to Colonel Harrison. It was time to take action. As the plane touched down in Chicago, Captain Jack Thompson felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him more than ever. The humiliation he had endured on the flight was not something he could just shake off. His mind replayed every moment. Karen's sneering comments, the forced relocation to a cramped middle seat, the cold dismissal of his military service. But as much as the sting of those moments still lingered, Jack knew it was time to act. He had been quiet long enough, and Sarah Mitchell's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes silence wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to speak up. The aircraft taxied to the gate, and the noise of the engines slowly died down, replaced by the hushed murmur of passengers gathering their belongings. Jack stood up, grabbed his carry-on bag, and adjusted the diplomatic pouch strapped securely to his side. He walked off the plane with a sense of resolve he hadn't felt before. His shoulders squared, his mind made up. He would not let this go. He didn't know where the journey would take him, but he knew it had to start here. As he entered the terminal, he spotted Sarah across the room, waiting by the exit. Her eyes met his, and she gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Ready to make that call?" she asked, her voice steady, though Jack could tell she knew the weight of the decision he was about to make. "I'm ready," Jack replied, his tone more determined than he had expected. He felt something shift within him, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long, and now it was finally time to put it down. They found a quiet corner near the gate, the hustle of the airport continuing around them. But in that moment, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Jack pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen for a moment. It wasn't easy. He had always been a man of few words, someone who handled everything with quiet dignity. But dignity had its limits, and his silence had allowed this kind of treatment to continue unchecked. Jack dialed the number for Colonel Harrison, his commanding officer. After a few rings, the line clicked and a familiar voice answered. "Colonel Harrison," the voice said sharply. "What can I do for you, Captain?" Jack took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Sir, Captain Thompson reporting. I apologize for the unscheduled contact, but I've had an incident on my flight from New York to Chicago." Harrison's tone shifted instantly. "Go ahead, Captain." Jack recounted the events, from Karen's mocking tone to the forced move to economy. He didn't leave out a single detail, documenting everything as clearly as possible. He even mentioned the way Karen had insisted on checking his ceremonial uniform and how she had belittled him in front of other passengers. "Your uniform wasn't properly stored?" Harrison asked, his voice cold with controlled anger. "No, sir, it was placed in the overhead bin, but not under the best conditions. I had to store it in a way that wasn't ideal for something of such significance," Jack replied, his frustration seeping through, despite his best efforts to remain composed. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jack could hear the sound of typing in the background. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was sharp. "I understand. This isn't just about you, Captain. This is about what you represent, and it's about respect for the uniform, for the service members who wear it." Jack's chest tightened. He knew Harrison was right. It wasn't just about his personal humiliation. It was about the entire military community being disrespected, and it had gone on for far too long. "I didn't want to escalate this, sir," Jack continued, his voice now steady but firm. "But I'm afraid this is part of a bigger issue. It's not just me, it's happening to others as well. I think we need to address it before it becomes a pattern." "Understood," Harrison replied, his voice now carrying an edge of resolve. "I'll initiate a preliminary inquiry from this end. Document everything, Captain. Times, locations, comments, anything you can. We'll move forward with this. This issue goes beyond a simple customer service complaint. It's about the way military personnel are being treated by certain corporations. And that's something we can't ignore." Jack nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. Finally, it felt like someone understood. "Thank you, sir," Jack said quietly, before ending the call. He looked at Sarah, who was watching him intently. Her expression softened as she saw the relief on his face. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice reassuring. "This is the first step, and we're not stopping here." Jack felt the weight on his shoulders lighten, just a little. He knew this was far from over. But as the airport terminal bustled around him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He had taken the first step toward change. And for the first time in a long while, Jack Thompson believed that standing up for what was right could actually make a difference. The eyes. Journey ahead would be difficult, but he wasn't walking it alone. And that, more than anything, gave him the strength to keep moving forward. The days following Jack's call to Colonel Harrison were filled with uncertainty. He knew he had done the right thing by reporting the incident, but the road ahead was murky. Would the airline acknowledge the gravity of the situation? Would his actions spark real change, or would it all fade into the background like so many other complaints before it? As Jack waited for further instructions, Sarah remained by his side, helping him navigate the growing storm. She had been in contact with her law firm, gathering information from other service members who had faced similar mistreatment. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Jack's experience was far from isolated. It wasn't just about a single flight attendant's prejudice, it was part of a much larger systemic issue within the airline. In the following weeks, the investigation began to take shape. Colonel Harrison's office had launched a formal inquiry into the airline's practices, gathering evidence from military personnel who had been similarly mistreated during flights. The results were shocking. 17 service members had come forward, with stories that mirrored Jack's. Some had been denied access to premium seating. Others had been humiliated or made to feel second class while traveling for official business. The airline had a problem, and it wasn't going to be easily swept under the rug. Sarah's legal team began compiling the evidence, building a case that would hold the airline accountable for its discriminatory actions. Jack had never wanted to be part of something this large, but as the facts came together, he realized how important this fight had become. It was no longer just about his own humiliation. It was about the dignity and respect that all service members deserved. They had been ignored for far too long, their sacrifices dismissed in the name of corporate convenience. As the legal team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, Jack found himself growing more and more frustrated by the airline's response. At she First, they tried to brush it off, dismissing the incidents as isolated customer service failures. They even offered travel vouchers to the service members who had come forward, hoping to buy their silence. But Sarah wasn't buying it. She knew this wasn't just about compensation. It was about creating a shift in the way military personnel were treated in public spaces. Then, everything changed. The airline's internal communications were leaked, revealing a disturbing pattern of behavior. An email from the director of customer experience instructed staff to scrutinize military upgrade requests with extreme prejudice, and it suggested that ceremonial uniforms should not justify premium accommodations. This was the smoking gun Sarah had been waiting for. The airline's own words had exposed the extent of the problem. The news spread like wildfire. The public outrage was immediate. People across the country rallied behind Jack and the other service members who had been wronged. The airline's reputation took a massive hit, and it became clear that they had no choice but to address the issue head-on. 3 months later, Jack found himself sitting in a London courtroom, flanked by Sarah and her team of attorneys. The case had evolved into a class-action lawsuit, with dozens of military personnel involved. Jack had never imagined that his quiet stand for dignity would turn into a battle that would shake the foundations of corporate culture. As the proceedings began, Jack took the stand to recount his experience. The courtroom fell silent as he spoke. His voice steady and clear. He described the treatment he had endured on that fateful flight, Karen's condescending remarks, the forced relocation to economy class, and the disrespect shown to his uniform. When the airline's legal team questioned him about his reaction, Jack answered calmly. "I maintained my composure," he said. "The uniform represents something greater than me, and that's why it matters. It's not just about one person's experience, it's about the men and women who wear this uniform every day. They deserve respect, not just in ceremonies, but in every part of life." As Jack finished his testimony, the judge's eyes shifted to the evidence that had been presented. The airline's internal emails were damning. The public outrage had forced their hand, but it wasn't just the PR damage that had made a difference. It was the collective power of the service members who had spoken up. Their stories were undeniable, and the airline had nowhere to hide. The airline's legal team quickly realized they were on the losing side. After hours of intense negotiations, the airline agreed to settle. But there was one final condition. Jack insisted on a public apology. The company had to acknowledge their wrongdoing and formally apologize to every service member they had mistreated. A week later, the CEO of the airline stood at a press conference, flanked by Jack and Sarah. The press cameras flashed as the CEO began to speak, his tone unusually humble. "Today, we acknowledge a failure that goes beyond customer service," he said. "We failed to show the proper respect to the men and women who serve our nation with honor. For that, we are truly sorry." Jack stood beside him, his expression unreadable. But inside, he felt a quiet sense of vindication. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the thousands of service members who had faced the same mistreatment. And as the press conference concluded, Jack knew that the fight wasn't over, but it was a battle that had been won. In the months that followed, the airline implemented a comprehensive respect initiative for service members, including mandatory training for all employees and an independent monitoring system to ensure compliance. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a victory nonetheless. Jack knew the road ahead would still be long, but he had taken the first step toward ensuring that no service member would ever have to endure what he had gone through. As Jack returned to his duties, he couldn't help but think about how far they had come. From that moment on the plane, when he had been humiliated and made to feel small, to this moment, where he had stood tall in front of a crowd of journalists and executives, demanding the respect that was rightfully his and everyone who served. And as he looked at the young guard who had approached him later that day, he realized that his actions had sparked a change that would last for generations to come. The weeks following the settlement were a blur of activity for Captain Jack Thompson. The case against the airline, which had started as a personal grievance, had grown into something far bigger. The class action lawsuit had gained momentum, and the public's support for Jack and the other military personnel involved was overwhelming. People across the country rallied behind the cause, their voices growing louder with each passing day. It was no longer just about the humiliation he had endured on that flight. It was about the dignity of every service member who had been disrespected in the same way. Despite the victory in court, Jack knew the real challenge was still ahead. The airline had agreed to make changes, but would those changes last? Would they follow through on their promises to treat service members with the respect they deserved? Or would this all fade into memory once the media attention died down? Jack wasn't convinced, but he also knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter. He had taken a stand, and now it was time to ensure that the respect service members earned would be honored. Every day, not just in a courtroom. The public. Apology from the airline's CEO had been a pivotal moment. Standing beside Sarah Mitchell, the attorney who had fought tirelessly for justice, Jack had watched as the CEO expressed regret for the airline's actions. The words were carefully crafted, but for Jack, they were a step in the right direction. The apology, though important, wasn't enough. It was a symbolic gesture, but the true measure of accountability would come in the actions that followed. As the months passed, Jack continued his duties with the Royal Guard, but his role in the lawsuit had forever changed him. He no longer saw his work as just a job. It was a mission to make sure that no service member would ever be treated the way he had been. He was determined to make sure that the respect for the uniform wasn't just reserved for ceremonies, but for everyday encounters, for every person who wore it, no matter where they were. One day, Jack received a call from Sarah. Her voice was urgent, but there was a sense of satisfaction in it too. "Jack," she began, "I think you'll want to hear this. What's going on?" Jack asked, bracing himself. "The airline has officially rolled out their new Service Member Respect Initiative," Sarah explained. "They've implemented mandatory training for all employees, including their flight attendants, and the CEO's office has confirmed they're establishing an independent monitoring system to ensure compliance." Jack exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. "I wasn't sure they were going to follow through. It feels like they've just been saying the right things to save face." "I get that," Sarah said, "but the changes are real. The fact that they've put systems in place to monitor their staff shows they're committed to making a difference. Of course, we'll be keeping an eye on things, but it's a huge step forward." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't fully allowed himself to feel before. The case had been difficult, draining even, but now it was clear that his actions and the actions of the other service members who had come forward had led to tangible change. "Do you think it'll last?" Jack asked, a note of skepticism still in his voice. "I do," Sarah replied firmly. "But it's up to all of us to keep pushing to make sure this issue stays on the radar. We can't afford to let it slip into the background again. The respect for our service members has to be part of the culture now, not just something that happens when the spotlight is on." Jack's thoughts turned to the young guards he worked with, the next generation of men and women who would wear the uniform. He thought about the future, about how they would be treated by the world outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, outside of the military bases where they served. Would they be treated with the same respect Jack had fought for, or would they be subjected to the same disdain that he had encountered? Jack made a decision then, one that solidified his new purpose. He would continue to speak out, to share his story, to make sure that those who followed in his footsteps would never have to face what he had. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was only just beginning. In the following months, Jack became more involved in advocating for military personnel, speaking at public events, and even working with Sarah's law firm to ensure that other service members' voices were heard. The battle for respect was ongoing, but the progress was undeniable. At the end of the day, Jack knew that his actions had sparked something larger than himself. The case against the airline had been about much more than a single act of humiliation. It had been about changing the way the world saw military personnel. And as he walked back to his post, feeling the weight of the uniform on his shoulders once more, He realized that the most important victory wasn't the one in the courtroom. It was the one that had been won in the hearts and minds of the public. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. Jack's story had become a symbol of the fight for dignity and respect. And that, he realized, was a fight that would never truly end. We've all had moments where we've been disrespected or overlooked, but what happens when it's not just an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior that affects those who serve our country? Captain Jack Thompson's experience with the airline wasn't just about a personal grievance. It was a wake-up call for all of us. It's a story about standing up for dignity, respect, and ensuring that service members are treated with the honor they deserve, both on and off the job. But it raises an important question. How do we as a society treat those who serve in the military? Are we quick to judge them based on their uniforms or their roles? Are we overlooking the sacrifices they've made? We want to hear from you. What do you think about Captain Thompson's decision to stand up against the airline's mistreatment? Have you ever witnessed similar disrespect towards service members or others in uniforms? How do you think businesses should properly honor those who dedicate their lives to serving their country? Leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts and experiences. We value your perspective. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more thought-provoking stories like this. Let's keep the conversation going.